Colonel Daglas Makgregor joins us now for our weighing in on all of this to make sense of what's happening in the world as Iran has now fired back, struck targets. We knew that this was coming. It didn't take 2 months for that to happen. Like the last time, Iran waited 2 months before this attack. It was almost immediate. Colonel Daglas Makgregor, great to see you. Thank you for jumping on with us today on this emergency broadcast. How are you?
Good.
What do you make of, first of all, maybe you can sort of paint a picture on exactly what happened here. How did this happen? And then what happens next?
Well, I don't know if you saw the tweet, or X as we call it right now, that I sent out. But
yes,
I think we
brilliant.
we need to understand that's essentially what's happened in a nutshell. First of all, President Trump, whether he admits to it or not, has made us a co-belligerent. He's essentially admitted by his actions and some of his words that we were in on this from the very beginning. And this is really disturbing, because from this point forward, I don't think anything we say, anything this government says, is going to be taken seriously by anyone in Moscow or Beijing or Tehran or Ankara or anywhere else. And that's the worst part, because clearly he helped to lull the Iranians into a false sense of security and set them up for this disastrous attack. So that's one thing. So the other thing is that short run, everybody's running around in Israel and declaring victory. Israel's supporters, I should say, their paid agents in the United States are supporting or are, telling everybody how happy they are. But in truth, this looks an awful lot like an Iranian Pearl Harbor to me. And nobody here today remembers, I was born shortly afterwards in 1953, but the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, they sank some ships, and then they too celebrated and sailed home. It didn't work out very well for them. And I think the Israelis are in a similar position. The Japanese could have landed and seized those Hawaiian Islands, and then it would have been hell for us to get them back. It would have taken at least 2 years. Who knows what might have happened? Fortunately, they didn't do that. The difference is that Israel cannot consolidate its victory over Iran. But they're assuming that they'll have help from us, that we will jump in with both feet and rescue them. In the meantime, the Iranians are firing all of their older missiles. And by older missiles, I mean old technology. And the old technology is being shot down, which is the goal. They want the Israelis to waste all of their inventory on these old missiles before they start using the really high-end, devastating material. So I think this is just the beginning. The other part of this is that we're now going to see the rest of the world sort of link arms around Iran. Because if you're sitting in Moscow or Beijing or Ankara or anywhere else, and you see what's happening to Iran, you say, well, look, if we don't stand by these people, inevitably we'll be next. We'll just be one more dead name on the list, like Gaddafi. So I think all in all, this is a catastrophe for Israel. But in the meantime, it looks wonderful for Israel, or at least that's what their supporters and agents in the United States want everybody to think.
Now, I think that there will be people who say, look, you supported Trump and this is happening. What I would say to that is we were speaking out against the war machine that was the Democrats. And Trump was the only space between full-on war that the Democrats were not going to stop Israel from doing this. It might have happened 6 weeks ago if they were in power. But I do feel like this is a betrayal of Donald Trump. This is something that Tucker had said. It would be a major betrayal of his supporters. And so would Trump have played Bibi's game knowing that we trusted him?
Yes. He would not be in the White House today if it were not for wealthy billionaires that support Israel and support Bibi Netanyahu, who funded his campaign and put him into the White House. I think he knew from the beginning that once he saddled up with the likes of Miriam Adelson and a whole range of others that fall into that category, that he was going to have to do their bidding. Remember, he's been down this road before. In 2019, in June, we came close to doing something very stupid with Iran, and Donald Trump said no. He walked away from it. This was the Global Hawk that was shot down on the edge of the air defense zone in Iran. Well, he was still a free agent. I don't think he is anymore. I think he's entirely dependent on the lobby as well as on the usual class of suspects. I mean, I'm tired of this Republican versus Democrat bit, Natalie. I just think it's a uniparty. We need to come to terms with the reality. We're not represented.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I mean, not to talk about like our personal lives or anything, but it was, up late last night, very difficult time sleeping. Natalie having trouble sleeping. You thinking about how is this going to affect the United States of America? I don't see in any way. Maybe you could explain to me how exactly any of this benefits the United States of America. I want to put up a slate here. I think, Philip, if we have this is a slate of all of these senators. Look at this. And members of Congress. All of these people, almost immediately, we stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. We're praying for Israel. Join me in praying for Israel. These are all members of Congress. Senator Katie Boyd, Representative Darrell Issa, every one of them, lockstep, praising Israel, God's chosen people. Glenn Beck tweets, we're praying for Israel. On and on and on the list goes. So how is this going to affect the United States of America? Well, of course, looking towards tomorrow when we're hearing about there's Iranian sleeper cells. I'm just worried about false flag attacks. My wife is worried about young men being drafted into war to fight in this boondoggle of a war. What do you think we're going to see?
I think the first thing we do have to consider very carefully is that whenever you have these kinds of crises, there's almost an immediate alliance overnight between criminality, ideologues, terrorists, and corruption. They all tend to cooperate very effectively. Many years ago, people were shocked to discover that Islamist terrorists were cooperating with members of the IRA in order to achieve their aims. This is back in the 90s. Well, that's what you're going to see happen here in the United States. Remember, we've got probably 30 million people came into the United States under the last administration about whom we know absolutely nothing. We have no idea what they think, where they've come from. We don't even know where most of them are. You've heard Tulsi Gabbard make that statement publicly. And she's also pointed out that we see a lot of evidence in Mexico and in the United States that these groups of people that came in illegally are using tactics reminiscent of what we saw in the Middle East when we had troops on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I think we have to bet that we're going to see trouble. Just look at Los Angeles. Los Angeles has an estimated 1.2 million illegals in it. Now add to that particular fire the drug cartels, Islamist terrorists or Islamist sympathizers, and people who may just be disgruntled. Somebody who stands on the sidewalk and you hand him a $50 bill and said, by the way, here's a Molotov cocktail, go around the corner and throw it at the police. This is what we're dealing with at every level. We have nuclear power generation systems. We have power grids all over the country. Along with shopping malls, we have military installations in many states that are not really that secure, that are not heavily guarded. Anything is possible, and I see almost no good news on the horizon. And I do worry about the parade tomorrow. And I was in the Army for most of my adult life. I love the Army, and I'm glad that people are recognizing it's 250 years since the Army was first formed. But this does worry the hell out of me because nobody in that parade is interested in harming anyone. They are simply marching as part of the tribute to this 250-year history. But I don't know what's going to happen.
If past is prologue, what will happen is that someone like me will pick up a book in 20 years and say, oh, that was all a lie? That's me reading Scott Horton's book and saying, gosh, but we have a voice that we didn't have before. I see now, I am so mad watching Fox News saying, I'll share this with you. I was watching Peter Doocy. Peter Doocy said, I'm on the White House lawn. I will tell you this, that Trump has said many times that the war in Ukraine is not our war and the war in Gaza is not our war. And Hannity goes, bye, Peter, bye. Cut him off. Because there was this indication that maybe Trump doesn't want these wars, and they cut him off. And it's full on that this was justified. And so now we see no space between the leftist and the right media at all. It's a war to sell. But we have independent media. So is there any kind of seed there that can make this different?
Well, I think you have chaos media. In other words, lots of different places, but they all tend to peddle the same narrative. I can turn on MSNBC and hear what you hear on Fox these days. I think you and people like you represent the alternative. What we don't have are big, powerful platforms that are adequately funded. Where are the billionaires that actually care about the country? We've got lots of billionaires who are hopelessly devoted to Israel and devoted to this idea that the world is a better place when we're bombing people everywhere. Those people are willing to spend their money to control the narrative and to disseminate what they want. We need people who are simply interested in the truth. We don't have what I would call authority media. You used to be able to turn on the television during the Vietnam War, and when Walter Cronkite came on in 1968, and he said, or 69, after the Tet Offensive, he said, it's time for us to get out of Vietnam. This isn't working. It doesn't make sense. People are dying pointlessly. It's time for the government to find a way out. Well, everybody believed him because he was truthful. We didn't expect him to lie to us about anything, and he didn't. What have we got now? Well, we've got you, Natalie, and we've got a lot of other good people, but we don't have the power behind you. Redacted needs more than, the sampling that you read.
And we're shadow banned on a lot of platforms.
And then we get, it's deeply disturbing. Colonel, because of your military expertise, I want to ask you now in Tel Aviv. So Glenn Greenwald moments ago posting this 2021 New York Times piece about the new IDF Supreme Command Post, which is in the heart of Tel Aviv. And they built this massive bunker system for the IDF, and they specifically built it beneath civilian buildings in Tel Aviv. They call it Fortress of Zion. And it was, of course, deliberately placed there to be so it couldn't be attacked without seemingly hitting civilian sites. So what do you where do you see Iran's targets? Are we going to see a lot of civilian infrastructure struck, mostly military targets, and then will Iran over 24 hours say, okay, we're done now, let's let cooler heads prevail, let's go back to the nuclear negotiating table? We see moments ago hypersonic missile attacks inside of Tel Aviv, and they can't stop it with this Iron Dome. So maybe you could just talk military, tactically and strategically here for Iran.
Well, Iran, first of all, has an almost inexhaustible supply of missiles, and they have alternative sources. They can not only build their own missiles, they can get additional components and warheads from other sources, whether those sources are North Korea, China, Russia, as I said before, potentially even Pakistan. And now the Turks are coming online and saying that they support Iran. And I'm sure that there are others. So I think there won't be a shortage of things for the Iranians to fight back with. The real question now is, what do we do? And I think President Trump is already signaling that he'd like to go back to the negotiating table. The problem is that no one believes him. He's destroyed his credibility. I don't think anybody's going to show up to negotiate with him about anything. So I think this is going to go on, and it'll get worse the longer it lasts. And eventually you reach the nuclear threshold. That's what's always worried me, because as the Israelis become more and more desperate and realize just what a terrible position they are in, that's when they threaten the use of a nuclear weapon. Now, the danger, of course, is that by that time, others will have provided nuclear weapons for use against them. In other words, unless there is some sort of miraculous come to Jesus moment in Israel, and I don't think it's going to happen there, this is going to reach a climax, and the climax is not good for Israel. It's going to be disastrous for the Middle East, disastrous for the world. But it may be unavoidable now. The Israelis are operating on a degree of self-congratulation, self-importance, self-love that you can't even begin to imagine. And you just pointed out a good example of where their thinking lies. If they're going to be defeated, then I think their attitude is, we'll pull the plug on everybody and kill everything. And that's a catastrophe, too.
I don't know what to say about that.
Well, I'm just projecting the future right now. I don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
But the Iranians, contrary to popular belief, whatever mistakes they've made, and I don't think they've made very many. I mean, everybody says, well, they should have given up enrichment. Not really. That's a sovereign right. And enriching uranium for purposes other than military is totally legitimate. Lots of countries have it. Lots of countries do it. The Indians and the Pakistanis both have nuclear weapons. They're too smart to use those things against each other. So in a sort of perverse kind of way, there's been a mutual balance of terror there that has helped to preserve some degree of peace. The problem we have right now in the region is you've got one country that has nuclear weapons. They want to maintain that monopoly, and they're willing to do anything against anyone to keep it. And that's where we are. And we, unfortunately, have encouraged it and underwritten it. Now, could this affect us here at home? Could people become so frustrated with us that ultimately they just attack us as well? I think we're going to see that in the region. It could actually spread to Europe because we have military installations there that the Iranians and others in the Middle East could attack. But it could also happen to us here in the United States. Remember, the southern border, Mexico, is America's soft underbelly. In other words, it's the place you go for strategic advantage against us because it forces us to fight on multiple fronts. We're not prepared for that in Mexico, but it could happen.
Yeah.
Militarily, I mean, did you guys prepare for when someone would hit nuclear facilities? So we now have confirmation from the Iranian side. Well, you know, the Israeli side, of course, told us that Natanz nuclear facility in Iran was destroyed. Iran is now saying there is radiological disbursement, and they're trying to contain it. So radiation is now escaping from this, and I don't know how many other facilities. I mean, what are we talking about here, Colonel? I mean,
well, you could
nuclear fallout across.
That will also bleed into Qatar, which has been trying to mediate our peace talks, which was supposedly an ally.
Well, Natanz, of course, is a facility that was not very deeply dug in. It's also a smaller facility. That doesn't mean it's any less disturbing what you're describing. And Iranians are talking about evacuating up to 1 million people to get them away from the Natanz facility. I don't see any evidence that the Israelis care at all about that. In fact, they may be celebrating it. And that's part of the
in fact, the Zionist line is we love the Iranian people. We're only against the regime. We want to free you, in fact, from life with cancer.
Yeah, right. Well, I wouldn't place too much value on that statement. I don't think the Israelis care at all. In fact, their real goal has always been the destruction of the Iranian state because they equate the Iranian state with their existential threat. That to them, that's the ultimate threat. And I was over there in 2020, and I told them that I didn't agree with that I thought of all the various Muslim states they were dealing with, the Iranians were the most amenable to negotiations. But I think the Iranians have taken a position, either you do what we say or you have to die. Now they're facing the Turks. And the Turks, in my judgment, are infinitely more dangerous in the long run to Israel than the Iranians ever were, because the Iranians aren't going to invade anybody. The Iranians don't want to project power anywhere. The Iranians aren't building bases around the world. The Turks, on the other hand, they can project power. They have the largest army in NATO, and overnight they can mobilize over 1 million troops and put them into the field, and they are within striking distance of Israel. And when you get that close to Israel, can you use a nuclear weapon right on your border against the Turks? I don't think so, because then you put your own population in the position where the Iranians are now with Natanz. I just don't think the Israelis have thought this through carefully, for all their self-love and claim of intellectual superiority or supremacy, and they are very intelligent, skilled, and talented people. I don't think they've thought it all through. I think the danger now is greater than it's ever been. I don't see how you end this without fundamentally destroying Israel. That's the biggest and the dumbest aspect of this whole thing, that the Israeli state itself stands an excellent chance of not surviving this.
Some people in our chat are saying, Trump is a traitor, treasonous. Others are saying Trump tried to stop all of this and that he didn't, that he didn't know any of this was going to happen, that Trump was really trying to push us towards peace. He didn't know what was going to happen, that he's the arbiter of peace here. I don't know that I believe. I mean, for months this has been planned. I don't buy that for a second that the Trump administration wasn't in on this or worked part and parcel with them. We just got word a few minutes ago that the U.S. Navy is now shooting down Iranian missiles. So the U.S. Navy is actively involved in this right now.
Of course, they have to be. These are Aegis-class destroyers. They have a role to play. I'm sure before long we'll see lots and lots and lots of troops show up. Now, when I say troops, I'm talking about combatants at sea, vessels, submarines. And by the way, I would fully expect to see the Russians show up with their submarines, the Chinese with their submarines. I would watch carefully what happens in the Strait of Hormuz. Look at what's happening right now with the price of oil. And that's the tip of the proverbial iceberg. I mean, inflation is going to skyrocket. In other words, whatever Trump was trying to do that made sense could easily be destroyed by all of this.
Well, Colonel Makgregor, thank you so much for your time. And, you can take a victory lap. You've been saying this is escalating for a long time, probably with no pleasure. But that's the reason we rely on your expertise. So thank you so much. And again, yes, as soon as I saw your brilliant tweet about this is a Pearl Harbor moment, we know we're in for the long haul. This is not a blip in the history of modern civilization. So please follow him for his analysis online. And we will be talking a lot, I'm sure, as this continues to escalate. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Colonel. Great to see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.